Recently now, in the last year or so, I sort of discovered animal rights and pro-intersectionality, partly in due from a debate on Animal Rights Zone, which is run and set up by Caroline Bailey in Australia. She, with the help of several people actually in the audience today, moderates this fantastic page which has really helped my own education about rights, about justice, the pro-intersectional framework. And having run VegFest now for 14 years, I suppose I am reasonably prominent. I'm on the radio a lot. I think I've been on the radio 9 times this last week, sometimes up to 3 times a day. Up until about a year or 2 ago, really, I didn't really have a concept of rights or indeed a social justice movement. I was, in fact, a dietary vegan. And indeed, right up until about 2 years ago, VegFest was pretty much a sort of veganish sort of festival. It wasn't that fussy. We would have a few slightly not quite what you call vegan groups come along. I mean, we had the Vegetarian Society. We, one year, famously had somebody called Part-Time Carnivore, which was interesting. We certainly learned quite a lot from that experience. But, you know, for me, the vegan message was all about really getting your food right, and that was about it, you know. My attitude was, well, look, you know, if we can... In fact, I remember being quoted on the radio saying, well, look, if we can get 80% of Bristol to go 80% vegan, think what that would do to our carbon footprint. You know, never mind shutting the M32 or closing Lulsgate Bristol Airport. You know, if 80% of Bristol went 80% vegan, we would have a huge, you know, reduction in carbon emissions and pollution. And of course, if 80% of Bristol went 80% vegan, we would have a lot less people going in for heart operations, getting diabetes. We'd have less obesity. You know, quite a lot of the doctors, well, I don't know about being out of business, but there certainly wouldn't be the queues in the GPs as much, or the waiting list for the operations. So, and indeed, even on the food supply, I mean, the reason I went vegan originally was because of the way that developing countries use, or rather developed countries, Western countries for want of a better word, use developing countries to grow cattle fodder, and you know, through this obscure sort of concept of land leasing, to basically the multinationals, they just take the land and use it, and never mind the indigenous people, never mind if the people, you know, are going hungry or not got enough money. I mean, this goes right back. I mean, you know, the British have been doing this for 300 years or more, indeed. I mean, you can go right back to the Irish famine, look at the way, you know, the Irish famine developed, the potato famine. So, you know, all these things, though, these 3 big areas of going vegan, you know, for the environment, for health, and for sustainable food production, that's what I've always promoted as a vegan. And it's only recently now that I realise that you can't really be 80% vegan. You know, vegan means something. It's not, you know, there's other words for 80% vegan. The idea of 80% vegan is something like reducitarian or flexitarian or vegetarian or some kind of other Aryan sort of thing. But, you know, vegan is really clear. Vegan means no animal products. So you can't really be 80% vegan. You're either vegan or you're not. So all of these reasons were the basis of my own advocacy, and I think a lot of people, today too, I mean, look, I don't want to go into names. I'm not going to start naming names or trying to shame anyone, but I do think that some of the main organisations especially, you know, are quick to promote something less than vegan. There's obviously a big rise for reducitarian movement. Indeed, the flexitarian Bristol group in Bristol tried to book in for this event, and we wouldn't let them because we don't really want to promote flexitarian. You know, there's plenty of people promoting all this stuff. But this isn't vegan. You know, flexitarian isn't really anything to do with being vegan. Being vegan means no animal product, and being flexitarian means, well, you just pick and choose whatever you feel like. And that brings me round to, you know, this fourth area of being vegan, which is rights and justice, and animals. And as I mentioned, it's only really, you know, I mean, I was somebody who rejected the idea of rights. I didn't really assign rights to, I didn't really think about it. And I got to be honest, I was put off by the traditional animal rights sort of 80s and 90s sort of image, quite angry, quite dark, quite sometimes violent, possibly extreme. What I realise, of course, now is that, you know, that was a growth stage, and now we're into a different era, and of course, really rights is nothing to do with being angry or, you know, hostile or aggressive or extreme or, you know, dressed in black with bandanas on or something, you know, looking like ISIS. It's not. That's, you know, that's the image that perhaps either has been portrayed or has grown up, whatever. That perhaps that's a different discussion. But right now, when we're looking at rights, you know, we're just talking about basically the basic right to leave animals alone, not to use them and not to enslave them, not to own them, and not to treat them as property. And so for me, the concept of rights is something that's really important now to get over in any advocacy. And the main reason I think that rights is really important in the vegan movement is because when you're advocating for veganism, and I'd assume most of us perhaps probably are vegan here, I'd imagine most of us do advocate in some way or other, whether it's just perhaps chatting at work or wearing a vegan t-shirt or, you know, perhaps doing something a bit more like some activism, you know, perhaps doing some gazebos and leafleting or helping organise vegan events or volunteering and stuff. A lot of us do advocate. And what I really kind of realised, it's not rocket science, but, you know, when you're advocating these 4 reasons to go vegan, right, for the animals, for the health, for the environment, and for food production, you know, there's an issue with that, is that the last 3 don't actually require you to go vegan. So, you know, if you're advocating for vegan on the grounds of health, it's like, well, actually, it's quite possible to be quite healthy and still consume just a little bit of animal product here and there, maybe. Oh, well, you know, I do fancy some boiled eggs every now and again, or, oh, well, I'm out, so let's just have the fish dish and be vegan the rest of the time. That sort of approach is, you know, you can be incredibly healthy. I mean, I don't know if there's any evidence that would support a difference in, you know, a 98% animal plant-based diet or a 92%, whether there's actually any difference. What I do know now, though, is that when you go vegan, there's new research showing that there's incredibly powerful effects on your health that only come when you go 100% vegan. They don't kick in if you're on a 97, 98%. You know, if you're still consuming a bit of animal product, you don't get that full health boost. But of course, you can be very, very healthy and still eat a little bit of animal products. And the same with the environment. I mean, you know, we can cut our carbon emissions by a huge amount, but we're never going to get rid of them all. So really going vegan or, you know, going reducitarian or flexitarian would have a huge effect. And there's no doubt if 80% of Bristol went 80% vegan or 80% plant-based, we would see a big drop in, you know, there would be a huge improvement for the environment. So again, there's this kind of get-out clause. It's like, well, yeah, you don't actually have to bother being vegan to help the environment. You can just really reduce meat and dairy consumption. And likewise with food production, it's the same thing. You know, food production is a huge global thing. And, you know, again, if there was this massive reduction in reliance on animal product and we were farming grain to feed to humans instead of animals, this would make, of course, a huge difference. But again, it doesn't demand that you're 100% vegan. It just demands that you reduce meat and dairy. So, you know, these 3 reasons are really, really, really good reasons. And there's a part of me really supports the whole flexitarian movement. the whole reducitarian thing, whenever the Daily Mail or the Telegraph comes out with more stuff about why you should go plant-based and perhaps think about reducing or da-da, I mean, I think that's brilliant. But I'm definitely in agreement with Dr. Yates here, is that I think vegans should promote the vegan option, because the vegan option, when you come to the fourth issue of animals, is distinctly different. So when you start talking about reducitarian and rights, you know, you've got the two don't add up. Because if one day you've decided to reduce your meat and dairy intake and then you decide to, have a boiled egg, you know, that's the point. Then you become violating the rights of another being. So, you know, if you've got a rights-based message and a belief and an understanding in being vegan, I think it really, I was about to use the word beefs up, so I'll have to use the word tofu's up the argument. And I really think it strengthens it, that it doesn't really give this get-out clause. Because when you start thinking about rights of another being, you realise that that's about that other being. It's not about you and all your stuff and then about this, that, and the other. It's about that individual. You know, so if you say, listen, never mind, eat vegan, but don't worry about the wine. You know, look, who cares about the wine? It's like, doesn't matter, does it? It's like, you know, you don't want to put people off or be too fussy. It's like, whoa, hold on. There's a sturgeon here who's just had his swim bladder removed to make your wine. You're saying that doesn't matter? You're saying that's not important? You're saying that it's effective to go on, you know, doing this to sturgeons in the name of, I don't know, being effective vegan advocacy or something? I don't think so. Because that sturgeon has a right to be left alone and not to end up in a bottle of wine or a plastic bottle of wine or whatever else. You know, that isn't a concept of rights. And so all this stuff that, you know, and it is mainstream. I mean, I find it disturbing to see, and I think a lot of other people do too, that a lot of the major groups do promote less than vegan. I mean, even the Vegan Society is, you know, praising all the vegetarian and all this vegetarian stuff. I don't see that's really got much to do with being vegan. So I found it really helpful to develop a rights concept. And I find it also really helpful to deliver that too in my advocacy. So now when I'm talking on the radio, I will always raise the issue of justice. I will always raise the issue of justice and rights for animals to be left alone to live, and that they have the same rights as any being that's born, should be given that freedom to live their life and not be enslaved or used. So getting that over, that message, can be a little bit problematical and challenging. I mean, one of the things I noticed too when I developed a rights sort of agenda is I got quite angry. And, you know, I've been a really nice kind of groovy, kind of happy, you know, ravey type vegan, and suddenly I was getting really upset with people and really angry and really hostile to people. And I realised that was just a change in my consciousness. And sort of now, 6 months on, I'm getting a little bit more, okay, you know. And I think developing and then sort of putting forward a rights concept is very challenging, because we're not, you know, it's like a new idea. And as Roger pointed out, you know, the big groups haven't really done us any favours in making clear what rights, you know, rights and welfare seem to be a sort of interchangeable, as if they meant the same. But quite clearly they don't. One is focusing on property and one is focusing on treatment. And they're two distinctly different concepts. So I think when you're trying to perhaps deliver a rights message, it doesn't help if you're quite angry. Somehow you've got to be, I don't know, the way I try it is to ask the question, is like, you know, but is there a justice question here? Is this a case of justice? Sometimes asking the question is a better way of making a point than sort of making the statement, because it invites the individual to start asking themselves about that issue. It invites the person to find their own answer. And of course, that's probably a better way of learning, is when you work it out for yourself. And certainly in all the radio interviews I've done in the last week, every single time, and I've been on the telly too, and in the papers, it's always mentioned a justice issue, but to try and, I don't know, introduce it in a gentle format that doesn't basically doesn't put people off. You know, because the concept of veganism is off-putting enough for a lot of people. And once you start drawing in rights, you know, it can get quite challenging for people who don't really accept. You know, I mean, try explaining to somebody that a woodlouse has rights, you know, and people, it's like, that's quite tough. I think a woodlouse does have rights. I was asked on the radio, it's like, well, of course, he's living, it's a little soul, you know. Woodlice have been around a long time. They're very evolved communities, I believe. Ants are the same, you know. So, of course they have rights, you know. Why would we say that, oh, because they're small, they don't have a right? I mean, that's not right. So, but I think it's also important to keep it in a balance and remember that, yeah, look, most people are interested in their health. And are probably more likely to respond to a sort of health advocacy, and that's fine. Obviously, come down VegFest, try all the wonderful food, and isn't it amazing, and la la la, and yep. And then I think more and more people are getting environmentally conscious. I think that's fairly obvious. We have to, and people are beginning to make decisions based on what they think will be the impact on the environment. And there is still a very lack of knowledge and understanding about our food supplies. It seems to be an area that people don't really talk about much. For me, it's a huge importance, the way that, you know, big ag and agriculture and, you know, what is sometimes referred to as livestock farming, you know, is really robbing so many people, causing so much starvation. You know, these are heavy subjects, and when you kind of get into like rights for animals, that is challenging to get over a concept to people who are perhaps resistant or hostile to it. So I think it is very important when you're advocating for justice to frame it in the right way, but don't drop it. You know, don't leave it out the equation. That's like, well, hold on. You know, this is an important area. These are about, you know. We know this, animals don't have a voice. You know, we have to become the voice for animals. So if vegans are not even going to bother mentioning that actually animals have rights to be left alone, then, you know, who is? So somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to stand up for this. And that's why I'd love to see all vegans promoting veganism and promoting rights for animals, as well as the health benefits for humans and the environmental benefits for the planet, and the food production benefits for a growing global population. And this brings it also into a slightly broader section. Can I just ask somebody how we're doing for time? I've got no idea what the time is. Oh, okay, I've got another 5 minutes. So this brings us into a broader section into then about sort of rights for all of us, and this is where it becomes a social justice movement. And, you know, it's not just justice for animals, it's also justice for our own people, our own health, and it's justice for the planet, and it is also justice for developing countries and indigenous people who are currently getting robbed of their food and water. And that's when it starts becoming into sort of the pro-intersectional framework, which, can I just have a quick show of hands? Who's familiar with the pro-intersectional framework? Sort of got a loose understanding. Yeah, that, you know, you can see that's probably roughly 25%, I should say. Pro-intersectionality is basically just joining up the dots between different oppressions and seeing where oppression and privilege lie. So to give you an example, when you've got a society that is basically racist, then you know, if you're somebody who's discriminated against on grounds of your colour, then that's an area where you're in oppression. You might not be racist yourself as an individual, and I hope nobody here is racist as an individual, but that doesn't stop the fact that society that we live in is inherently racist. And although that's changing, we have to accept that that's part of it. And likewise with men and women. You know, 100 years ago, as you know, in this country, you know, women didn't even have the right to vote, and women were seen as property. Men owned women, and of course that's still true in many parts of the world, but that's changing. And if you fall into being both a person of colour and a female, then you lie in two areas of oppression. Not necessarily between individuals, but the society that we live in. That's what I'm on about. So it's an institutionalised racism, institutionalised sexism, institutionalised homophobia. A big problem is ableism. You know, ableism. This society is so geared up to people who are fully abled that if you're disabled, you come into an area of oppression. Ageism is another. You know, very young people, very old people are often discriminated against. Our society is just not geared up always to help the most vulnerable. In fact, it's the opposite. Our society is geared up to favour the oppressors. And it's the oppressed that are, you know, left. And pro-intersectionality helps people see their own areas of oppression, and it also see their own areas of privilege. So you can start seeing how, you know, society may favour you, may give you a place of privilege, even if you're not actually recognise that or you don't think you are. Nevertheless, the institutionalised society does favour certain groups over others. So the framework of pro-intersectionality helps join up these dots between areas of oppression, help you realise what's going on, not just in your own lives, but in that institutionalised society area. And it sort of puts a bit of separation between the two, I think. And I found it particularly helpful because I've never considered myself racist, I've never considered myself sexist, but now I understand that by nature as a white male, I do occupy positions of privilege, whether I like it or not. And that it's up to me to recognise that and you know, to work within that framework. And of course, by bringing in animals into this framework, which we refer to as, you know, as you know, probably speciesism, we're bringing animals into account as part of the moral community. And they will therefore have rights in the same way as 100 years ago the suffragettes fought for the rights of women. And, you know, 250 years ago, the abolitionists fought for the rights of people of colour. And now, of course, we are in a social justice movement that is fighting for the rights of animals. But it's very important to respect the fact that the animals have rights and that that's what a social justice movement is really doing, is trying to bring justice to those that have been oppressed and denied that justice. And I'm certainly now one who does think that, you know, we owe animals justice, but we also owe ourselves justice. And the framework of pro-intersectionality, which you probably gathered I'm very new to, I shouldn't really even be talking about it because I don't really even understand it, but I'm getting there. And it's a kind of introduction, hopefully, to encourage all of you to take up this framework and learn a bit more. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think I even knew what the word meant sort of 3 months ago. I can barely say it now, but... Is it? They must be keen. They're coming over the fence. I'll sling them back in the water, Roger, now. Do so. But we've got pirates! So, you know, for me, it's incredible. It's like I've been vegan 32 years and I'm just starting out on a whole new journey. I'm just discovering what social justice means. I didn't even know what a social justice movement was. And I'm only just beginning to figure it out. And I think we're on the crest of something really, really exciting. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see the pro-intersectional framework become mainstream, where everybody will be relating to it, identifying with it, and understanding the, you know, some of the stuff behind it. And that's really because ultimately we've got a goal between us as people on this planet to remove all forms of oppression. And the only way we're going to remove all forms of oppression is, first of all, recognising the oppression that lies within ourselves. And if we can't take a good long look at ourselves and see the oppression that lies within and how that transmits towards other people without us even realising it, then we're never going to remove oppression. I'm one of these people who does think that nearly all oppression stems from the fact that we use animals in the way we do. And that if we can change that, as Roger referred to, you know, change the paradigm, the way we view animals no longer as property, but as persons, then we'll be beginning to make all the areas of oppression in the world come to an end, because we'll be recognising those forms of oppression that lie, that some of us don't even realise they're there. And as we learn more about oppression, so we'll learn about removing it. That's my hope. Some of you know that we have a pro-intersectional vegan summit in October. Indeed, we've got some of our guests will be here, some of the speakers here will be speaking at that event, and we've got some very, very other distinguished people coming from America and from Australia and from Europe to speak on these subjects. So I very much hope that some of you join us for that. I can highly recommend the work of a few people, Black Vegans Rock, AFCO and Christopher Sebastian McJetters, two very, very interesting, dynamic speakers and writers right now. Both are coming to our summit, and indeed Christopher sat right here. So I'll just embarrass Christopher by waving and saying, here he is. Thank you for coming. Christopher, it's lovely to see you again. And Roger mentioned one or two others. Anthony Nocella, who I've seen write some really, really good stuff about ableism. He really tackles this ableism concept. There's some great feminist vegan writers out there. There's some great, there's some LGBT community members who are really, really developing some really excellent stuff. And in fact, all you've got to do is go and look at the VegFest Pro-Intersectional Summit, and you'll have a list of about 20 speakers. Dr. Breeze Harper, she's appearing by Skype. Sarah Woodcock is going to be on Skype. Will Tuttle, he'll be Skyping too. Roger Yates will be there. A number of others. So we very much hope you join us for that. And just to leave on a note that in an hour's time, our VegFest attempt to show animals are no longer property but people, and to try and introduce a little bit of a concept of justice and rights for animals, is our very own Pig Freud here. And Kevin will be glad to notice that I found a safety pin. She's currently wearing his nose. That's because you've got a bit of a trouser issue. But anyway, Pig Freud is basically a guitar-playing pig who is, really try and help people see animals as people or persons. And I think when we start seeing animals as persons, which we already obviously do, it becomes easier to start seeing, recognising the rights that they possess. And I think, however we come to it, whether it be through the works of academics or through, large group national groups or through grassroots vegan advocacy, we will come to this point where we do shift that paradigm, where we no longer look at animals as property, but we look at them as persons. And just as we've done that over the last 250 years, I very much hope the social justice movement will continue to grow, and it will have integrity and honesty, especially about the individuals within it. My hope is that, especially now we have this fantastic framework, the pro-intersectional approach, that we're going to be able to take this whole thing on one step further. And before we leave this planet, we will see an end to oppression for all beings. Thank you.